Welcome to this information video for NUI Galway students who will be going abroad to study under the Erasmus programme in Semester 2. In this video, I would like to give you a general introduction to the Erasmus programme, as well as providing you with some guidance for completing the online grant application form, applying to your host university for admission as an Erasmus student, and completing your learning agreement. Other topics covered in this video include the OLS language assessment, organising insurance for your Erasmus visit, completing your Erasmus grant agreement, and some general tips and advice for your Erasmus preparations. I'll start by introducing you to the staff of the International Office who deal with our outbound Erasmus programme. My colleague Jodie Blumenfeld is the person at the end of the Outgoing Erasmus at nuigalway.ie email address. Jodie will be your first point of contact for Erasmus paperwork, grant payments, and general queries. My name is Mary Lyons, and I'm the Institutional Erasmus Coordinator, meaning that I manage mobility of our outgoing and incoming Erasmus students, as well as staff mobility and our Erasmus partnerships with universities abroad. At the moment, we're both working mostly from home, and the best way to contact us is via the Outgoing Erasmus email address. We also have a website that I'd encourage you to visit because it contains a lot of useful information, as well as copies of almost all the documents you require. Erasmus is an acronym for European Community Action Scheme for the Mobility of University Students. It began in 1987, and in the 34 years since that, millions of students have taken part, and it's been an important rite of passage for them. Erasmus works on the basis of contracts or agreements between universities to exchange students in particular subject areas. So the idea is that NUI Galway will host a number of students from any one of our partner universities for a semester or year of study, while NUI Galway sends its students to that university in return. Erasmus students don't pay any tuition fee to the host university abroad, but they must continue to pay their normal fee to their own home university. So you need to be registered at NUI Galway in order to ensure that you can receive credit for your period of study abroad in the framework of your degree programme here at NUI Galway. Central to your study period abroad is a very important document called your learning agreement. This sets out a list of the courses that you will take while abroad, and it requires the signatures of your academic coordinators here in Galway and at your host university abroad before you begin your Erasmus study visit. This prior approval of the courses that you'll take while abroad guarantees that once you pass those courses, you will get full academic recognition from NUI Galway for your Erasmus study period. Last but not least, most students participating in the Erasmus programme will receive a mobility grant. This Erasmus grant will not cover all of the costs of moving and living abroad, nor is it intended to, but it will certainly help you with those costs. I'll return to the subject of the grant later. For now, I want to bring your attention to two important documents. The first is the information handbook, which you can download from our website, and the second one is the online form that you will use to apply for the Erasmus grant. Jodie will send the link to the online form to all students who have been nominated for Erasmus for Semester 2. Please note that the strict deadline for Semester 2 applications is midnight on Monday the 29th of November. At that time, the form will close and no further applications will be possible. Here's what the handbook looks like, and I would encourage you all to read it. Very often, students come to us with questions that have in fact been answered in the handbook. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the application form, and some of what I'm going to say might sound very basic, but I want to make the process as easy as possible for you, and I also want to help you avoid errors that students have made in the past which caused problems for them and us, so please bear with me. Before you begin filling in the form, I think it will be helpful if I outline the purpose of it, because you are required to tick a box at the end to confirm that you understand NUI Galway's data protection policy and that you consent to the use of your data. So the information that we capture in this application form will be used to create a database of outgoing Erasmus students to which Jodie and I have access. Every single question in the form is there for a specific purpose, and every single answer that you provide is important in ensuring the accuracy of our database. This will be very important for things like the processing of your Erasmus grant payment and for issuing customised letters to individual students, as well as feeding into an EU database of all Erasmus students all over Europe. The storage and use of information held in the EU database is regulated by EU privacy laws. You will be asked to provide the name and contact details of your next of kin, and obviously this information would need to be shared with other NUI Galway staff in case of emergencies or crisis situations. Here's what the application form looks like. As you can see, it's quite straightforward, but please set aside 10 minutes or so to fill it in with care and attention, double checking everything before you hit the submit button. Also, it's very important that you access the link to the form via your NUI Galway Office 365 account. The link will be sent to your @nuigalway.ie email address, and the form will only accept responses from NUI Galway Office 365 accounts. So please only click on the link in your email and don't share it with others. There are about 30 questions on the form and most are very straightforward. But before you begin, please make sure you have two pieces of information to hand. The first is your bank details, which we'll need in order to make your Erasmus grant payment. You'll find them at the top of your bank statement. We'll require your sort code and your 8-digit bank account number. The sort code is a 6-digit number that identifies the bank branch where your account is held. Many Irish sort codes begin with the number 9. Sometimes sort codes are written in pairs of digits with spaces or hyphens in between, but on this form, please write your sort code as one continuous 6-digit number with no spaces. It's important to remember that while you may notice that your sort code appears on your debit card, the 8-digit number beside it is the card number and is not your bank account number. You should look for your bank account number on your bank statement, and please write it in the application form without any spaces between digits. If your bank account is not held in the Republic of Ireland, then you will need to give us your BIC number and your IBAN in place of the sort code and account number. These are simply the internationally recognised format of the sort code and account number respectively. You will also need to provide the start and finish dates of the semester that you'll spend at your host university. They may have already sent you these in an information sheet, or you might have to consult the academic calendar that you can find on your host university's website. I mentioned before that we will use the information you provide to create our database, and you will help us enormously if you take the time to ensure that you've written each response accurately and with attention to detail. It goes without saying that errors in bank account details are going to cause problems and significant delays in grant payments. But even apparently small details like incorrectly written names and addresses take time to rectify, and these details are important. We will use our database to generate a formal, personalised nomination letter for each one of you, showing your name, address and date of birth, and confirming your status as a nominated Erasmus student from NUI Galway. You might have to produce this letter for Susie, or present it to your host university, or to some administrative authorities in your host country. It's important that the letter contains accurate information and that it looks professional, so please ensure that your name and address are written correctly, with each word starting with a capital letter. For your address, you have up to 4 lines available in the form, so use as many as you need. Remember that if you live in Galway or Limerick City, for instance, you don't need to write Galway, County Galway or Limerick, County Limerick. But if you live in Athenry or Ennis, for example, you should write Athenry, County Galway or Ennis, County Clare, making sure to include the word county. For some of you, all of this will be very obvious, but we see many examples of carelessly completed forms, and as I said, not having to spend a lot of time amending student information will leave us more time for other tasks, like supporting students and dealing with their queries. When you're completing the form, it's advisable to use the form of your name that appears on your passport, and one first name is sufficient unless you normally use 2. Some students occasionally use the Irish version of their name. I would advise you to choose one and stick to it for all your paperwork. The home address you give should be a permanent home address, and when you're selecting dates using the calendar, please make sure that the year is correct. You'll be asked to insert 2 email addresses, an NUI Galway one and a private one, purely so that we have an alternative email address for you in case there's ever an issue with your NUI Galway email account. I would emphasise, however, that we will normally communicate with you through your NUI Galway email address, and this is the one you should always use for corresponding with us. Emails sent from Hotmail and Gmail accounts can end up in our spam folders, and we may not notice them straight away. Incidentally, I should mention that when we say an alternative email address, we mean an alternative email address for you, not one for your parents. It's our policy to regard students going in Erasmus as adults, and we will not be communicating with their parents unless it becomes essential due to some emergency situation. In general, where a parent contacts us to ask questions about their son's or daughter's Erasmus, we would be obliged to obtain the student's written permission before discussing them with the parent. Erasmus grant payments will be made by electronic bank transfer, and so it's very important that you double check your bank details before you submit the form. And if you happen to have more than one bank account, please make sure that the details you've given us are for the account into which you wish your Erasmus grant to be paid. Also, please make sure you haven't confused the sort codes and account numbers of 2 different accounts. The deadline for submission of the grant application form is midnight on Monday the 29th of November. When you submit your application form, you'll immediately receive an email like the one shown here, confirming receipt of your application and providing you with some further information. You'll see that the email doesn't come from an NUI Galway email address, but rather from Microsoft Power Apps. You'll notice too that towards the bottom of the email, you'll find a full list of all the questions in the form and the answers that you provided. Please review these carefully to make sure there are no errors, and should you discover a mistake, please don't submit the form a second time, but instead contact us at the Outgoing Erasmus email address. What happens if you miss the grant application deadline? Well, in that case, unfortunately, you cannot be considered for an Erasmus grant. You may be approved to study abroad as a zero grant Erasmus student, and that would mean that you can enjoy some of the privileges of the Erasmus programme, such as not having to pay tuition fees to the host university and getting full recognition for your study abroad, but you will not be eligible for an Erasmus grant. I must emphasise that where the Erasmus grant is concerned, a deadline really does mean a deadline. This is always the case, but particularly so this year, with so many students due to go on Erasmus. I need to remind you that an Erasmus grant is not an automatic right or entitlement, but a privilege, and in some other countries it's regarded as a scholarship for which students must compete. We will begin processing the student data immediately after the deadline, and we will be unable to accept any late applications. I would suggest that you complete the form as soon as possible and don't leave it too close to the deadline, allowing for unforeseen problems like slow Wi-Fi. As well as applying for the Erasmus grant, you'll need to make an application to your host university for admission there as an Erasmus student. You must make sure to check the deadline and adhere to it. Your NUI Galway coordinator will have nominated you to your host university, and so you can expect to receive an email from that university advising you of their application procedures. Now, students sometimes miss important emails that end up in their spam folders, and this can happen, for instance, with the very first communication from your host university, even if it's sent to your NUI Galway email address, because the server here might identify the unknown sending address as spam, and that's why it's really important to keep a close eye on your spam or junk mail folder. If you're required to provide the Erasmus code of NUI Galway on your application, that's simply IRL Galway 01. If you have the possibility to apply for a room in a university residence, I would encourage you to do so. It's true that accommodation standards in residences can vary, and the level of comfort in some may not be on a par with what some of you are used to in Galway, but in general, halls of residence will be of a decent standard, and while you might have to share kitchen facilities with quite a number of other students, the advantages of living in a residence include security, reasonable rent, sometimes with utilities included, and the opportunity to get to know lots of other students. In terms of the academic preparation that you should be doing now, your host university may require a preliminary learning agreement along with your application. This is where you will identify the courses that you wish to take. Make sure that you're clear about ECTS requirements of your particular course here at NUI Galway. Don't wait until you're halfway through your studies abroad to find this out. If you have any doubts about this, ask your academic coordinator now. Languages students, be aware that you will have to do an OLS language assessment before you go abroad in Erasmus. The Learning Agreement is a really important document. It's central to your Erasmus studies. It shows the courses that you'll take while abroad, the ECTS credits you'll obtain from them, and how your studies abroad will be recognised by NUI Galway. You will need to get sign-off or approval of the Learning Agreement from NUI Galway and your host university. In the case of NUI Galway, you'll need approval by your academic coordinator. There is a section of the document called During the Mobility Period, and that's where you can reflect changes that you might make to your course choices. This is the Learning Agreement in its original format. Now this year we're introducing the online Learning Agreement and encouraging students to use it if possible. However, the information to be completed is essentially the same, and that's why I've put up the old version here so that you can take a look at it and see what kind of details you'll need to provide. The very first section is quite straightforward and simply involves writing in your name, your email address and your field of study, as well as giving the details of your academic coordinators both here and at the host university. The second section is very important. This is where you'll list the courses that you intend to take at the host university. You'll need to give the titles of the courses, the course codes, the semester in which the courses are to take place, and the number of ECTS credits attached to each course. Please don't forget to fill in the little section at the very end here, which involves providing a web link to the course catalogue at the receiving institution. In other words, where on the host university's website did you find the list of courses? The next section of the Learning Agreement is Table B, and please don't leave it blank. Table B involves identifying how the courses that you'll take while abroad will fit into the framework of your NUI Galway degree, ensuring that you get recognition for them. In the majority of cases, this will simply involve writing in mobility window and the number of credits that NUI Galway will assign to your year or semester abroad, usually 60 or 30 ECTS as the case may be. You'll also be required to indicate your level of language competence based on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, where A1 is beginner level and C2 is proficient. There's also a native speaker box, if that's applicable, for instance, if you'll be studying abroad through English. You'll need to provide names and contact details for your coordinators here and at the host university, and the document will have to be signed by all three parties. This brief outline is, of course, not a substitute for reading pages 14 to 15 of the Information Handbook, where the learning agreement is dealt with in more detail. As I said, we're keen to encourage the use of the online learning agreement, which is straightforward to complete and easy to sign. And it has the great advantage that you don't need to worry about losing your learning agreement or saving it to a USB stick, which might then get mislaid, or having multiple copies of the document, which can cause confusion. The online learning agreement, once created, is available for you to access from anywhere and from any device, using your NUI Galway campus account credentials. Your academic coordinator should be able to provide you with instructions for creating your OLA account and completing your online learning agreement. Alternatively, you may contact our office for these. Some of our partner universities are not yet equipped to manage the online learning agreement, and so you will find a link on our website to the old version should you need to use this. Students sometimes aren't sure who at NUI Galway is to sign their learning agreement. Well, in most cases, it's your main academic coordinator, and you'll find a list of all subject coordinators and their contact details at the back of the Information Handbook. Only if you're a BA non-language student going to Malta, Uppsala or Utrecht, send it to Mary Lyons, that's me, and please provide confirmation that the courses that you've chosen have been reviewed and approved by both your academic coordinators. If you're a BA student, you must make sure that each of your academic departments or disciplines is aware of and has approved your choice of courses. Don't forget to tell your second subject that you're actually going in Erasmus. Get approval of your courses in writing by means of the learning agreement, which will be signed by your main sending academic department, plus an email from the second subject to confirm that they're happy with your choice of courses. And do make sure that you take sufficient credits for your particular programme of study. Who should sign the learning agreement on behalf of the host university? Well, that will be your academic coordinator there. And if you don't know who that is, then your coordinator here at NUI Galway can help you identify the correct person. And particularly with the online learning agreement, it's crucial that you have the correct name and email address for each coordinator. Online linguistic support is a tool developed by the European Commission aimed at helping students to improve their language skills. If you will be actively using French, German, Spanish or Italian in your studies abroad, then you need to complete an online language assessment before you go. While this is a test of your language skills, you don't need to study for it or worry about it. The results will be visible to Jodie and me, but are not meant to be shared with other parties, and your results can't be used to prevent you going in Erasmus. The assessment will involve tests of grammar, vocabulary, listening comprehension, and reading comprehension skills, and your results will be expressed in grades according to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Generally, B1 is the very minimum level a student should have if going on Erasmus as a language student, and B2 is what most partner universities would expect. If your results are disappointing, it's probably an indication that you need to work on your language skills, but this is where the free online language course comes in. After completing the assessment, each student gets access to this course, and it will be a useful preparation for Erasmus, regardless of your language level, so that your language skills don't get rusty before you go on Erasmus. The link provided here will take you to a page where you can find a wealth of information about all aspects of the OLS. Please note that you will be required to complete a further OLS assessment at the end of your Erasmus studies, and this will hopefully provide evidence of your progress in the language. Another important task as you prepare for your Erasmus visit is to look into travel insurance. The European Health Insurance Card, or EHIC, is the most basic level of cover and a fundamental requirement for any European citizen travelling to another EU state. You can find out more about it and apply for the card at ehic.ie. However, the cover provided by the EHIC will not be sufficient of itself, as it's very limited in its scope, covering only basic care within the public healthcare system, and for that reason you will also be required to hold a private travel insurance policy. If you or your parents have an existing health insurance policy, you may be wondering if it might meet the requirements, so check what it covers. When going on Erasmus, students must ensure that they are covered for personal accident, medical treatment, repatriation, lost or stolen possessions, and disruption to travel plans, what's known in insurance terms as cancellation or curtailment of travel. We cannot choose a policy for you, nor can we advise on the suitability of specific policies. We can give you the names of some insurance providers, but you must make the decision on purchasing a policy that meets your needs. Pay attention to any exclusions or special conditions. For instance, check whether there might be limits on the duration of any single trip, or restrictions in relation to making trips home during your Erasmus visit. Above all, please make sure that you read carefully the section of the handbook that deals with insurance, that's Chapter 5, and the information provided at the web link shown here. One of the most enjoyable aspects of preparing for your Erasmus visit is finding out more about your Erasmus destination. It's definitely worthwhile doing some research not only into your host university, but into the town, region, and country where you'll be living. The website of your host university may be a good starting point for this, and tourism websites will also be useful. Your NUI Galway academic coordinator may be able to show you some reports written by former NUI Galway students who are on Erasmus at your destination. Also, you may be lucky enough to have connected with some Erasmus visiting students who may have been here at NUI Galway in the last semester or year. You'll find some hints and tips on the Erasmus app, which you can download, and the website Just Landed, although it's aimed really at people moving abroad to work, does have some helpful information for the various countries under the heading of Culture, which will be worth taking a look at. Here are a couple of random links that I'm throwing in here because they might be useful for you to have a look at. The first is a blog, which is nice as a general commentary on Erasmus, in that the author gives quite helpful insights in preparing to go abroad, finding accommodation, making friends, managing money, and generally getting the most out of the experience. He or she, I'm not sure who the author is, does go into quite a lot of detail about Erasmus paperwork, and to be honest, I would prefer if you would take your advice and guidance from us on that particular aspect of Erasmus, because different universities have different ways of doing things. The second link deals with the elephant in the room, so to speak, the question that's preoccupying everybody with travel on their mind at the moment, and that's the COVID situation around Europe. There's a really useful website called Reopen EU, which gives detailed up-to-date information for individual countries, and that's definitely worth consulting. At this point, it seems appropriate to mention COVID-19 and its possible impact on Erasmus study visits. Now, unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all the questions that you'll have at this stage because the overall situation is so unpredictable, but I must ask you to read carefully the information on page 3 of our handbook for outgoing Erasmus students. That is a list of caveats about taking part in Erasmus during the current global health emergency. Please keep in mind that as well as completing a risk assessment, you will be required to sign a declaration confirming that you understand and accept these conditions and the risks involved, as well as your own responsibilities in this regard. As part of your preparation to go on Erasmus, you should make sure to consult the Department of Foreign Affairs website, where you'll find travel advice by country, not just on the subject of COVID, but also on topics like safety and local laws. It's recommended that Irish citizens travelling or living overseas register their contact details with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. This means that the Irish embassy or consulate closest to your place of residence abroad will be aware of your whereabouts, and you can be contacted and provided with assistance if there's a crisis such as a natural disaster, civil unrest, a terrorist incident, or a family emergency. You should note the contact details of the Irish embassy or consulate in your host country. Here are some more items for your to-do list. First of all, as mentioned already, investigate your insurance options and sort out your European health insurance card. Make sure your passport will be valid for the full duration of your Erasmus study visit, because if it expires while you're abroad, you'll find it much more complicated to renew it from another country. You may also find that your host university requests a copy of your passport at the time of application, and if they find that it's due to expire during your time there, it could cause a delay with the processing of your application. Set up online banking so that you can keep an eye on your account and know when your Erasmus grant arrives. Think about getting an international student identity card, which will give you reductions on things like travel and entertainment. And finally, you'll get an invitation to join our Facebook group, NUI Galway Outgoing Erasmus 2021-22, and this will be a very useful platform for exchanging information and keeping in touch. After we've processed the grant applications, we'll send you some key documents before mid-December. A letter of nomination from NUI Galway confirming your Erasmus student status, your Erasmus grant agreement, the Erasmus Student Charter setting out your rights and responsibilities as an Erasmus student, the Erasmus timeline showing what needs to be done and when, and a safety advice sheet. Language students, please note that you are obliged to do an OLS language assessment and that we won't be able to issue your grant agreement until that assessment has been completed. The grant agreement is your 4-page Erasmus contract, setting out the terms and conditions for the award of your Erasmus grant. In the grant agreement, you will be required to insert your personal details and your bank details, as well as the details of the insurance policy that you've purchased. You'll need to sign the grant agreement, date it, and return it to the international office before you leave to go on Erasmus. Please note that by signing the grant agreement, you confirm that the insurance policy whose details you've inserted in the grant agreement meets the requirements set out earlier in this presentation. If you have a disability, special needs, or a condition that entails additional expenditure for you in order to take part in Erasmus, you may be eligible for an additional Erasmus grant. This grant is intended as support with the particular costs associated with taking part in Erasmus, and it does not cover ongoing routine medical expenses. Some eligible costs would be, for instance, special transport or accommodation, or the cost of a personal assistant or assistive technology related specifically to your Erasmus studies. If you feel that you would qualify for this support, please contact us. Outgoing Erasmus students who are registered with our disability service should inform the disability officer that they are going to study abroad. It's important also to inform your host university about your disability and your support requirements. You may be wondering about the amount of the Erasmus grant. You'll see from the figures here that the monthly rate varies according to country. Some countries are regarded as having a higher cost of living, and this is reflected in a higher monthly grant rate. Students going to Scandinavia or the UK, for instance, will receive €350 per month, while a rate of €300 per month applies to all other countries. While we talk about the Erasmus grant in terms of monthly rates, we don't pay the grant in monthly instalments. Instead, we pay the main instalment, which is about 80% of the estimated total based on the duration of your study visit, at the beginning of your Erasmus visit, with the remainder paid after you've returned home, provided you've completed your study visit satisfactorily and all your Erasmus paperwork is in order. There is an additional grant for financially disadvantaged students. This is known as SISI, the Social Inclusion Supplementary Support Initiative, and this allows eligible students to receive an additional monthly payment on top of the regular Erasmus grant. The SISI grant rate in 2020-21 was €160 per month. The criteria for SISI are set out by the Higher Education Authority, and the students who will qualify this year will be those in receipt of a SUSI grant. Please be aware that there are certain conditions attached to the award of the Erasmus grant, and that you may have to forfeit your grant, pay it back, if you fail to complete the agreed study programme, or if you fail to complete a minimum of 3 months abroad, that's 90 days. If you return home without completing the agreed study period, but you have completed the 90 days, you can be asked to return a proportion of the grant. Returning home without completing your international year has implications for your subsequent studies, your final degree, and your fees at NUI Galway. If you fail the international year, it effectively means that you return to year 3 of a 3-year degree programme, and as such, you will have used up your 3 years of free fees, and you'll be liable for a repeat fee which currently stands at over €1,800. I'll leave you with a final reminder about the Erasmus grant application deadline, which is midnight on Monday the 29th of November. You must get your application in before that date if you wish to receive an Erasmus grant. I hope that you found this presentation useful. We will offer students the opportunity to bring questions to a live Q&A session that we'll offer in the week before the grant deadline. We will also offer a further information session a little closer to your departure date, containing some more practical information about living and studying abroad, as well as an outline of the various pieces of Erasmus paperwork you'll need to complete during and after your study visit abroad. For now, I'd like to wish you the best of luck in your Semester 1 exams.